There is a specific kind of silence that follows the destruction of a command center, not the silence of an empty building, not the silence of a power outage or a communications failure, the silence of a place that was, until the moment before the strike, the nerve center of an entire military machine, the room where the phone rang when American aircraft entered Iranian airspace, where generals coordinated missile launches against neighboring countries, where the orders went out to fire cruise missiles and drones at civilian shipping in the world's most critical energy corridor. That room does not exist anymore. The generals who sat in it are gone. The phones that rang in it are rubble. The coordinates that were stored in it, the command networks that ran through it, the institutional knowledge of who calls whom when the strike package crosses the border, all of it deleted in the time it takes a precision munition to close the distance between launch and impact. CENTCOM just released the footage, and what it shows is something qualitatively different from every previous wave of strikes in this conflict. This is not coastal radars. This is not fast attack boats burning at their moorings. This is not missile storage sites on islands that Iran called its unsinkable aircraft carriers. What the latest CENTCOM footage documents, including one of the largest single explosions of the entire conflict captured over Tehran, is the deliberate, systematic elimination of the IRGC's command and control brain, the headquarters from which Iran's most powerful military organization coordinated its proxy terror network across the Middle East, Asia, and beyond. The Aerospace Force headquarters, the command nodes that connected every dispersed element of the IRGC's operational apparatus to each other and to whatever fragmented leadership still exists above them. Those nodes are gone. And the strategic consequences of their elimination are going to be felt across this conflict and across the IRGC's entire regional architecture in ways that the headline coverage of explosion footage has not yet begun to fully reckon with. But let's back all the way up. Because to understand why striking command centers changes this conflict's trajectory more fundamentally than any of the preceding 8 days of strikes against military hardware, you need to understand what those command centers actually did and what the IRGC looks like operationally when they no longer exist. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not a conventional military organized like a conventional state's armed forces. It is simultaneously a military institution, an intelligence apparatus, a political enforcement body, a business empire, and a regional power projection network whose tentacles extend through proxy organizations in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza, and as far as Afghanistan. The coordination of all of those elements, the flow of money, weapons, personnel, intelligence, and operational direction between Tehran and every node in the axis of resistance network, requires a communications and command infrastructure of considerable sophistication, not because the IRGC's technology is particularly advanced by the standards of peer competitors, but because the geographic breadth and operational diversity of what it manages demands a coordination architecture that can simultaneously run a maritime harassment campaign in the Strait of Hormuz, direct Houthi operations in Yemen, manage Hezbollah's posture in Lebanon, oversee Iraqi militia activities, and coordinate the domestic repression apparatus that keeps the Iranian population from translating its documented discontent into organized political action. All of that coordination required command centers, specifically the IRGC headquarters and Aerospace Force headquarters that the strike footage now shows as burning ruins in Tehran. And here is the detail that changes the strategic picture beyond the immediate tactical destruction of physical infrastructure. When you eliminate a command center, you do not merely destroy the building. You destroy the institutional memory embedded in that location. The contact lists, the communication protocols, the coordination routines that the people who worked there had developed over years of operational practice. The specific individuals who knew which proxy commander to call for which kind of operation. Who understood the back channels, Who had the relationships with the Quds Force network managers in each country? Institutional knowledge of this kind cannot be reconstituted from backup hardware or moved to a new location and immediately restored to full function. It requires time, physical safety, and the kind of organizational continuity that a force operating under continuous American strikes, with its leadership dispersed and underground, with its communications infrastructure being degraded in every strike cycle, does not currently possess. The IRGC's command centers in Tehran are gone, and for the first time in 8 days of American operations against Iran, the people inside those centers are not going to be reorganizing in a backup facility and resuming operations, because the backup facilities are next on the list, and the platform architecture being employed to reach Tehran tells you that no location in Iran is now outside the strike envelope. Let's talk about what that platform architecture actually looks like, because the combination of systems now operating against Iranian command infrastructure represents a targeting capability that Iran's own command centers were specifically designed, at significant expense, to survive. The fact that they did not survive, it tells you something important about both the sophistication of the American strike package and the degree to which Iran's hardened infrastructure investments were optimized against the threat environment of a decade ago, rather than the one that arrived last night. The B-1B Lancer is the aircraft that most analysts believe is now participating in the deep strike component of the campaign. Though no official confirmation of specific airframes for specific missions has been released, the operational logic points directly at it. The B-1B is a supersonic heavy bomber capable of carrying up to 24 joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, the JASSMER variant, with a range exceeding 500 nautical miles. That range number is the critical operational parameter, because it means the B-1B does not need to enter Iranian airspace to reach command centers deep inside the country. It launches from well outside the threat ring that Iran's surviving air defense systems can theoretically engage. The JASSM-ER navigates autonomously after release, with a low radar cross-section that does the stealth work independent of the launch platform signature. The target goes dark before the air defense system monitoring the area can confirm that anything was inbound. By the time the explosion is visible, the B-1B is already well outside Iranian radar coverage and turning for its base. That is the operational profile that allows strikes on Tehran command centers to occur without the fighter escort, the seed suppression package, and the full tactical air wing that striking defended targets inside Iranian airspace directly would require. The standoff capability eliminates the exposure. The JASSM's autonomous guidance eliminates the need for the launch platform to maintain contact after release. And the B-1B's Mach 1.25 transit speed means it arrives at its launch point, releases its weapons load, and departs before the Iranian air defense picture can assemble a coherent response. The F-35 in this architecture is not the strike platform. It is the sensor and coordination platform that makes the B-1B's standoff strikes devastatingly precise against targets in contested airspace. The APG-81 AESA radar and distributed aperture system that the F-35 carries gives it a battle space picture that no other aircraft in the theater can match. Flying in the contested airspace over Iran while the B-1B releases its cruise missiles from standoff range, the F-35 passes targeting data, identifies emerging threats, suppresses or defeats remaining air defense nodes with its internal weapons load, and maintains the real-time sensor picture that keeps the overall strike package coordinated through the engagement. The B-1B brings the payload. The F-35 brings the eyes. Together, they constitute a pairing that can reach any fixed facility in Iran at any depth, with a level of precision that the target's hardening was not engineered to survive. And the F-15E Strike Eagles and F-16CJ Wild Weasels that have been running every night for 8 consecutive days continue their mission profiles unchanged. the wild weasels suppressing whatever radar systems remain operational, forcing Iranian air defense operators into the same impossible choice they have faced every night. Turn on and transmit your coordinates to an anti-radiation missile that will home in on your emissions, or turn off and blind yourself to the incoming strike package. Neither choice saves the facility behind the radar. One choice saves the radar operator, the other does not. The IRGC Aerospace Force headquarters specifically deserves examination beyond the tactical damage its destruction represents, because of what the Aerospace Force controls and what losing its headquarters means for the operational coherence of Iran's remaining military response capability. The IRGC Aerospace Force is the institutional home of Iran's ballistic missile program, the Shahab variants, the Fateh family of solid-fuel tactical missiles, the Zulfikar and Dezful extended-range systems, the Khaybar-Shikan that Iran has been publicly citing as the advanced strike capability it has reserved for future escalation. All of these weapon systems, the missiles that Iran's spokespeople reference when they warn that significant military capability has not yet been deployed, are coordinated through the Aerospace Force's command structure, the targeting intelligence that identifies which missiles go to which launch sites, the launch authorization protocols, the battle damage assessment process, the coordination between the Aerospace Force's mobile launcher elements dispersed across the Iranian landscape, and the command nodes that direct their fire. Those command nodes in Tehran are now rubble. And here is the part of this story that the Iranian government's own statements inadvertently confirmed before the strikes even landed. Iran's army spokesman went on record stating that a significant part of Iran's military capabilities had not yet been used, and that Tehran's response could go beyond the enemy's expectations. The statement was intended to project capability and threaten escalation. What it actually revealed, read against the operational picture of 8 days of American strikes, is that the IRGC's command structure has been so thoroughly degraded that the surviving leadership's primary communication to the outside world is a press conference assertion that they have weapons they haven't used yet. Not a demonstrated operational capability, not a visible military action that supports the claim. A statement delivered by a spokesman, while the command centers that would coordinate the use of those undeclared weapons were already in the targeting database for that evening's strike package. Read that carefully, because the timing matters. Iran's commanders promised escalation while CENTCOM's aircraft were already airborne, executing the strikes that would eliminate the infrastructure through which that escalation would have been coordinated. The IRGC's public communications in this conflict have been operating in an increasingly disconnected relationship with the operational reality they are describing. Claims of destroyed American aircraft that CENTCOM confirmed never happened. Claims of decisive ballistic missile strikes on military bases, while the operational tempo of American strike operations, unchanged, unpaused, continuing every night, contradicts the assertion. Claims that significant military capability has not yet been deployed, while the command centers that would deploy it are being obliterated in real time. The gap between the IRGC's press release reality and the observable operational picture is not a small analytical discrepancy. It is the functional performance of an institution that has lost the ability to calibrate its public communications against operational reality, because the command infrastructure that would produce that calibration has been systematically eliminated. President Trump's comparison of the IRGC to ISIS is not merely rhetorical framing for a domestic political audience. It is a strategic designation with operational consequences. When the IRGC is characterized as a terrorist organization in the same category as ISIS, the legal and operational framework for what the military campaign can target expands in ways that the previous framework did not fully encompass. Command centers become legitimate targets under counterterrorism frameworks. Leadership figures become targetable individually. The proxy organizations that the IRGC funds, trains, arms, and directs become extensions of the same target set rather than separate actors requiring separate justification frameworks. The designation matters, and its operational consequences are visible in the strike footage CENTCOM released. Command centers, headquarters, the places where the IRGC makes decisions, not just the hardware with which it executes them. 3 thresholds were crossed in a single operational period. Taken together, they describe a conflict that has crossed from its degradation phase into something that looks considerably more like a decapitation phase. The first threshold. CENTCOM fired Hellfire missiles directly into the smokestack of a vessel, the Belma, a Curacao-flagged tanker that had transported approximately 38 million barrels of Iranian crude over its operational lifetime, as it attempted to reach Karg Island in defiance of the American naval blockade. This was the first direct engagement of a vessel attempting to breach the blockade, and the targeting choice, the smokestack, which disables propulsion without destroying the vessel or targeting the crew, communicated the enforcement logic with physical precision. The blockade is real, enforcement is kinetic. The consequences of defying it are mechanical and immediate, and they will happen in daylight with cameras running. The second threshold, the evening strike wave completed at 2100 Eastern Time, hitting Iranian command centers, air defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, with F-35s confirmed in the strike package, visibly photographed refueling from a KC-135 tanker, an F-35 refueling for an Iran mission with AIM-9X missiles on its wingtips, which marginally reduce its stealth profile, is a specific communication to the Iranian air defense operators who are supposed to be tracking it. We brought the stealth aircraft, and we are not even fully optimizing for stealth because the remaining threat environment does not require it. The confidence embedded in that image is its own form of information warfare. The third threshold. For the first time in the 8 days of this escalation phase, Tehran's own air defense systems activated in both the eastern and western districts of the capital. Iranian state-aligned media confirmed it. CNN's correspondent reported being woken by loud explosions. Residents of Tehran, the center of the Islamic Republic, the city that houses the supreme leader's residence, the IRGC's central command infrastructure, the government ministries that constitute the regime's formal institutional architecture, experienced the physical reality of this conflict in their own city for the first time in this phase of operations. Tehran is no longer a sanctuary. That is the strategic statement embedded in the third threshold. Now let's look honestly at what Iran's dual-track strategy reveals about the regime's internal condition, because the simultaneous release of an American hostage and the IRGC's continued missile launches against neighboring states describe a command structure that has lost the ability to coordinate its own contradictory impulses into a coherent strategic posture. The release of Dana Kari, an American citizen wrongfully detained since late 2024, was characterized by Iran as a gesture of goodwill and framed in the diplomatic language of confidence-building measures. At the same moment, the IRGC's operational elements continued to launch attacks across the region. Bahrain targeted, Kuwait under missile fire, Iraq's oil export complex struck by a drone that no party officially claimed. The Basra oil terminal, handling 3.3 million barrels per day of Iraqi export capacity, shut down completely after the strike. These are not the actions of a regime executing a coherent dual-track strategy. They are the actions of a regime with multiple competing power centers and each operating their own track simultaneously without central coordination. Because the central coordination mechanism, the command infrastructure that connected all of those tracks to a unified strategic authority, has been the primary target of 8 days of American air operations. The civilian government wants the diplomatic track. The IRGC's hardline operational commanders want the military track. The proxy organizations in the region are executing operations whose relationship to both tracks is ambiguous, and the supreme leader, whose authority would theoretically resolve the contradiction between all of these tracks, remains at an unknown location whose public silence has now extended for months. The hostage release and the missile launches are not a coordinated dual-track strategy. They are two factions of a fragmented regime, each doing what their institutional logic tells them to do, without the central authority that would normally adjudicate between them. When you eliminate command centers, you do not merely destroy the hardware that connects those factions to each other. You eliminate the institutional space in which the adjudication between competing strategic impulses can happen. You take a fragmented command structure and fragment it further. You take a regime that was already struggling to produce unified strategic decisions and remove the infrastructure through which even imperfect coordination was occurring. What you get on the other side of that, what the IRGC's command structure looks like after its Tehran headquarters have been struck, is not a weakened version of the previous command architecture. It is something qualitatively different. Dispersed operational elements with existing launch authorities, disconnected from each other and from whatever political authority they nominally report to, each making autonomous decisions within the operational doctrine they were trained on, without the coordination layer that would allow those decisions to be calibrated against the broader strategic picture. Uncoordinated missile salvos, proxy groups acting outside Tehran's direction, because Tehran's direction can no longer reach them through the communication infrastructure that has been degraded. Escalatory actions that the civilian government did not authorize, because the channel through which authorization would flow has been physically destroyed. This is the operational condition that the IRGC's command structure is now operating within. And it is the condition that makes the next phase of this conflict both more dangerous in the narrow tactical sense, because uncoordinated actors with launch authorities are unpredictable in ways that coordinated actors are not, and ultimately more decisive. Because a military machine whose brain has been removed cannot sustain organized operations for the duration that the regime's public posture pretends it can, the Iraq oil situation deserves specific strategic attention because it represents a compounding of the economic pressure on global energy markets that is occurring in parallel with the military campaign. A drone struck a tanker at the Basra export complex. No party claimed it. Iraq shut down every crude oil loading terminal in the country in response. Basra handles the bulk of Iraq's 3.3 million barrel per day export capacity. It is the third largest export complex in OPEC. Its complete suspension, added to Karg Island's blockade enforcement, added to dramatically reduced Strait of Hormuz commercial transit volumes, means that a significant portion of the Persian Gulf region's oil export capacity has been simultaneously removed from the market in a single operational period. Oil markets going up and down, as the administration has publicly acknowledged, is not a side effect of the military campaign. It is a strategic variable that the operations planners have incorporated into their assessment of when and how Iran's leadership will reach the conclusion that the cost of continued military confrontation exceeds the political cost of negotiating. The economic pressure operating through energy markets runs on a different clock than the military pressure operating through strike cycles, but both clocks are running simultaneously, and both are moving in the same direction. Picket Mountain, the name that sits above everything else in the announced targeting sequence, the underground site suspected of supporting Iran's nuclear program, named publicly by the president, confirmed as monitored, warned as targetable if necessary. Picket Mountain is where the B-2 Spirit comes in, not the B-1B with its standoff cruise missiles. The B-2, operating from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, flying a mission that could reach Iran and return without stopping, carrying the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, a weapon that weighs 30,000 pounds and is designed to penetrate up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. This is the weapon that exists for one specific purpose: to reach what is inside a mountain, to defeat the hardened, deeply buried facilities that conventional precision munitions cannot touch, regardless of their accuracy, because the structure above the target is simply too thick and too dense for anything short of a penetrating bomb of this scale to reach through. The B-2 is in the bullpen. The GBU-57 is loaded. Picket Mountain is named. The conditional is Iran's failure to come to the negotiating table before the preceding phases of the campaign have run their course. This is the announced ceiling of conventional military force against Iran's nuclear program. and it has been placed on the public record deliberately, not as a bluff, not as rhetorical pressure, but as a sequenced step in a target list whose preceding items have been executed exactly as announced. The sequence was stated publicly. The preceding items on the sequence have been executed. The credibility of the remaining items is now established by the operational record of the items that preceded them. The honest strategic assessment of where this conflict stands after the command center strikes is sharper and more decisive than at any previous point in the 8-day operation. The IRGC's maritime harassment capability has been substantially eliminated. Its fast attack fleet has been reduced to whatever survives in shallow water hiding places that sea drones are progressively mapping and engaging. Its coastal defense systems have been struck across the full perimeter of the Gulf Coast. Its radar and communications infrastructure has been degraded to the point where operating it coherently is now the exception rather than the norm. Its air defense network protecting Iran's interior has been stripped back enough that Tehran itself experienced strikes, and F-35s are flying the mission without fully optimizing for stealth. Its army has evacuated its headquarters. Its tank divisions have been struck. Its police stations have been targeted. Its nuclear facilities have been engaged. Its power plants have been hit at the coastal margins. And now, for the first time in 8 days of strikes against military hardware, its command centers, the brain of the entire machine, have been obliterated in footage that CENTCOM released to the world before the fires stopped burning. What remains of the IRGC's operational capability is real, but increasingly disconnected. Mobile missile launchers dispersed across the Iranian landscape, operating without the command infrastructure that would coordinate their targeting and timing. Fast attack craft hiding in shallow inlets, waiting for orders that can no longer reliably reach them through degraded communication channels. Proxy organizations in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and elsewhere that have their own operational momentum and their own institutional decision-making authority, but that were previously calibrated and directed by the Quds Force Coordination infrastructure that no longer has its Tehran command nodes. A military machine without its brain is not a military. It is a collection of armed people and weapon systems making independent decisions without the common picture, the common orders, and the common timing that make those individual elements function as something greater than their individual parts. Some of those independent decisions will produce dangerous outcomes: the uncoordinated launch scenario, the proxy action that nobody in Tehran authorized, the escalation that the civilian government would have prevented if it could still reach the operational elements through communication channels that exist. That is the risk embedded in the command center strikes. It is real, and it demands acknowledgement. But the alternative, leaving the command centers intact and continuing to strike hardware while the brain directing that hardware remains operational, was producing a different risk. A militarily degraded but organizationally coherent IRGC that could reconstitute its operational capability between strike cycles faster than the strikes could permanently eliminate it. The command centers were the reconstitution mechanism. The people inside them were the institutional knowledge that transformed replacement hardware into operational military capability. Remove the hardware and leave the brain, and the brain finds new hardware. Remove the brain, and whatever hardware survives cannot be effectively reconstituted by the dispersed underground communication-degraded elements that remain. CENTCOM has chosen to remove the brain. The footage shows what removing the brain looks like, and the IRGC spokesman who warned that Iran's response will go beyond the enemy's expectations delivered that warning from a command structure that, as he spoke, was losing the nodes through which that response would have been coordinated. The Strait of Hormuz is being contested in ways it has never been contested in the history of American military operations. 20 ships from CENTCOM destroyer and carrier strike group assets maintaining a blockade that has now been kinetically enforced. The world's most sophisticated stealth aircraft refueling over the Gulf before striking the most sensitive command infrastructure in the Iranian capital. Sea drones rewriting the cost economics of literal naval warfare. HIMARS launching from Kuwait and Bahrain simultaneously. 5-hour strike packages hitting 6 locations at once. and now command centers in Tehran, producing one of the largest explosions of the entire conflict, documented in CENTCOM footage released with the confidence of an organization that is not worried about what the adversary will do in response, because the adversary's ability to coordinate a response has just been physically eliminated. The generals who sat in those command centers knew when the strike came what it meant. They had been inside the system long enough to understand the sequencing. Hardware first, sensors second, air defense third, command centers. They understood what came after the command centers in the announced sequence. They had the intelligence picture that told them the B-2 was in the bullpen and Picket Mountain was named. What they did not have in the final moments before the precision munitions arrived was a way to stop it, because the radar systems that should have warned them had been suppressed by wild weasels. The communications infrastructure that should have allowed them to coordinate a response had been jammed by growlers. The air defense batteries that should have engaged the inbound weapons had been struck in the preceding cycles, and the JASSM-ER cruise missiles navigating autonomously at low altitude were already below the radar horizon of whatever sensors remained operational when the launch authorization was given from well outside Iranian airspace. The IRGC's military brain has been obliterated. What the IRGC does next, it will do without the command infrastructure that made it the most dangerous non-state military actor in the Middle East for the past 4 decades. And what it does next, whatever form it takes, it will do in a strategic environment where the American strike architecture that eliminated those command centers is still airborne, still targeting, still building the intelligence picture for the next wave, and sitting within range of every remaining fixed facility in Iran that has not yet been struck. The phone in the IRGC headquarters no longer rings. The order no longer goes out. The generals who decided what to do next can no longer decide anything from that room. The footage of the explosion over Tehran is not the story of a building being destroyed. It is the story of a brain being removed from a machine that is still, for now, moving on momentum. Momentum runs out. The brain does not come back. And whatever the IRGC does with the momentum it has left is what the next phase of this conflict will be fought over. In the absence of the command infrastructure that would have made that remaining momentum organized, coherent, and strategically directed, it was organized, it was coherent, it was strategically directed.